Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's Intelligence Brief on Daniel Davis Deep Dive, where each week on Friday, we kind of recap some of the main things that that we have kind of shown people this week. I know everybody doesn't get a chance to watch every show, and there's some key things that, you may have missed. So we want to make sure that the most important things of the week we wrap up in one episode right here, and then we bring you some updated information of today, of things that are happening even just hours ago, which we're going to cover at the end of this video. And so the first one we want to get to, which was some of the biggest news of the week, was that the United States finally passed, after nearly 7 months of attempting, a big aid package for Ukraine, for Israel, and for Taiwan. And most of the focus was on the $61 billion Ukraine funding bill. And here's what we said on that. On the manpower issue, Russia not only has more men by millions, and they certainly do, but they also have more trained men, because they actually did something that I advocated strongly that Ukraine do in the early part of the war, which is that they should have taken a large chunk of men, like 100,000, moved them out of contact, start to train them up over between a year to 18 months, if they could possibly, hold that much patience, and then have a defensive strategy that would give when it needed to, but only to buy time for these guys to go on an offensive, so that they had a credible offensive force that was equipped, maintained, and trained. The critical part there is having a trained force. They didn't do that. They tried to do it on the cheap, and they did it quickly. They trained very minimally. And in the 2023, they lost the vast majority of everybody that even had trained up prior to the war, and most of those that had trained afterwards. So right now, you don't have to have trained much at all to be able to hold a trench line. You can train a guy for 2 to 3 weeks and teach him how to shoot, and he can hold a trench line. But he can't conduct even active defense on that line. There is a 600-mile front, and Russia is on the move in almost every bit of that. At least 5 or 6 key points in there. They're on the move and making significant gains in recent days. Even now, than it used to be, a few meters per day. Now that they're getting half a kilometer per day, they're making much more rapid progress, because the Ukraine side is not just running low on ammunition, which it is, but they're also running short of trained manpower. They're running short of mines. That's a recent development I haven't seen many talk about in the Western media, is that the minefields that Russia used to break the teeth of the Ukrainian offensive last year had been used by many places by the Ukrainians on their side, but they're running so low on them. Now, all of a sudden, we're starting to see maneuver by the Russian side, because there's not enough mines to channel them into areas. And that is an alarming development, because if Russia starts moving larger scale, because they don't have to go inch by inch with men on the ground like Ukraine tried to do, now then they're actually advancing in armored vehicles and then putting them on the other side. That can't be sustained on the Ukraine side. This this package right here has been hailed today by President Biden as being decisive. It's going to defend democracy. It's going to in our national interest. Only it's not going to make any fundamental difference on the battlefield, because you can't print men. Now, that was actually from a Defense Priorities panel that I was on earlier this week, where we were talking about the funding bill and all that went along with it. So most of you probably didn't even see that at all, which is one of the reasons we're including it on here. One thing that you're going to see both in this clip and in nearly all of them that we show today is one common theme that's a bit troubling, is that there seems to be a lack of a strategy. Lack of even an objective. What are you trying to accomplish? So we have this big spending bill, $61 billion. I'm going to get into some of the detail of that as we go through this episode in other segments. What do you want that to accomplish? So, for example, in this one here, where I'm talking about, you can't print men. You can print money and you just borrow that money, all day long, like we keep doing, and, making ourselves deeper in debt. But the question is, what do you want that money to accomplish? So there was an article in Politico that came out it was either yesterday or this morning. I'm not sure when it was actually published, but it's talking about the next tranche of money that's going to come out for this $61 billion. Out of that, they're going to take a $6 billion package that could be announced actually later today. that's going to include all kinds of stuff like Patriot missiles, more artillery shells, air-to-air missiles that are going to be retrofitted on some of the Ukrainian aircraft, all kinds of stuff. It's like, wow, that sounds really good. $6 billion. That's a big one on top of the $1 billion that was announced a couple of days ago that's supposed to start some things moving right now. When you look at the fine print, though, in the article, it points out that it will be several years before that stuff actually shows up on the battlefield. So everybody's all giving this big woo-woo, yay, and this flag waving like Gary showed a second ago on the House floor when this was passed, as though it's going to help them right now. This stuff will be done probably years after this war's probably over. I can't see how this war can continue on for years, because they need dramatic help right now on the front line in large quantities of anti-aircraft missiles, air defense capacity, air power, minefields, minefields, on top of the air artillery and all that, and a trained force. So again, I keep coming back. What is the strategy here? What is your objective? So far, the U.S. has said stuff like, well, we want them to hang on. I think that was what Biden, I think it was his phrase there. This will help them hang on. Hang on until what? In order to what? And how long do you think that's going to happen? And if you're saying this is going to hang on, then that implies that you're going to then come back with another really big request, assuming that they actually can hang on, for the American people. And how long is that going to be? How many of those are you going to have? You see, they're not being straight with the American people on just that service alone, because they know for sure that this aid package is not a permanent thing. So they know they're going to come back and ask for more. But what's problematic in a significant degree is they don't seem to have an understanding of what this can do and how they're going to hang on for multiple years, or even what the administration hopes this accomplishes. Do they want to help Ukraine win? Is that this situation? Is that the case where Zelensky says he wants all the way back to the 1991 borders, basically everything to include Crimea? Is that a Biden's objective? Is it say, no, we just want to put you in a better negotiating position, which is this weird theoretical thing that Zelensky has never embraced and isn't now? So are we trying to set up and say we want this objective when the Ukrainians themselves are saying they want this one? I don't think it's even gone that far. I don't think they even think about it. I think it's like, this can kick the can down the road. And this makes people happy for the moment, because it sure does make a lot of defense contractors happy, as we say very many times. But so far as I can see, they're the only ones that are really benefiting from this, because since there isn't a strategy, since there is no vision for what this is supposed to accomplish, what it will accomplish is it's going to continue the fighting. Because now then that's just like fed, somebody who's dying a little bit more food and a little bit more water, so it'll keep them alive, but it's not enough to heal them. It'll never be enough, because the manpower will never be enough, as I pointed out in that clip right there. But that's just the way it is right now. And so that's why we're telling you, because we want you to be aware of what's really going on, so that when these things start to fall apart, that we can hold people accountable, at least call them out. That's what we're hoping for. All right, let's stick in the same context here, but now we're going to go into Macgregor, because he's going to be talking about, in one of our shows this week, kind of the proxy nature of what we're doing. So we say we're helping Ukraine, but in reality, it's more like a proxy war to help Ukraine fight Russia, because that's what a lot of people want. That's why they support all this, because it harms Russia, so they believe. But there's some problems with that, as Macgregor points out.
The apparatus in Washington has been hijacked by people with a lot of money who have driven policies in directions that they wanted to go. Some of these were designed to enhance them, but many of them were really ideologically driven. If you look carefully at the neocon way of thinking, the entire world will not be safe until the United States Army occupies virtually all of it. This is the sort of insanity that we've been dealing with now, certainly since the early 90s. And we've seen it over and over and over again, and it fails and it fails. Somalia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, move forward into Iraq, then into Syria, Libya, everywhere else you can imagine. But the American people have to put an end to it. the folly of proxy wars, particularly when you try to use a proxy war to achieve these seemingly unattainable aims. We have invested too heavily in too many places for too long. They're all failures. We have no sense of loss. We simply walk past the latest disaster. We whistle past the graveyard, congratulate ourselves. It's very reminiscent of Bundy and McNamara, who had a letter exchange in which Bundy said to McNamara, we probably won't win in Vietnam, but it's still the right thing to do. This is 1965. The notion that you should do something when you are not convinced that you can win is it's beyond belief.
And you see, that's where we still are to this day. We don't have a vision for what the day after looks like. What is going to happen once this finally concludes? Let's say for a moment, one of our viewers there actually this morning put something in our chat here even before we were going on live. So I appreciate that, and I saw it and pointed out, what about the day after? What about the rebuilding cost here? We haven't talked much about that even on this channel. Washington hasn't apparently thought about it at all. Everybody's focused on this funding package here, and like I said a second ago, there's got to be more that they're thinking about coming in to fight the war. What about when the war's over? I think that the most recent claim I've seen is something like $1 trillion or something like that. It could be a lot more than that. These things are almost always underpitched. It's almost certainly going to be a lot. Where's that money coming from? Has anybody in the White House said we're going to be on the hook for that? Or are they saying, no, Ukraine's going to, or the Europe is going to do it? They're the ones that are going to cover that. It's going to be whatever you want to fiction number you want to pull out of the thin air, $500 billion, $1 trillion, $10 trillion, whatever number they want to use. Where's that money coming from? Who's signing up to actually perform and produce that much money? Where's it all going to come from? It's not even addressed. But just think about it. Whatever the number is, I think the total was 200 plus some odd billion in the first 18 months, and I think the European Union has had another 50 billion package. We now had this 61 billion, so there's 300. So just round it out, say 400 billion. Let's say $400 billion from the start of the war up through the end of this year into next year. That's a fraction of what the rebuilding costs are going to be. Who's going to pay that? That's what needs to be talked about now. That's why I say the absence of a strategy is crucial and vital to have, so that you know where you're going and you can decide before you start on the journey, do you have the financial capability? Do you have the resources possible? Is it strategically achievable? See, those are things that should be decided before step one is even taken. But instead, we're on step 30, and we don't even know where we're going, if we can even afford step 48 down the line somewhere. We have no idea. You see where this is going. It's setting up for a disaster like Vietnam, like Afghanistan. So that fell apart for very predictable reasons, things that should have been known, and many were screaming it every year before it happened, what was coming. And now then when it did, what happened? We bailed. And now then we haven't given any money because we say, oh, well, we don't want to give it to the Taliban government. So now then all these people that we claim to support all those years are languishing in poor, in all kinds of horrible conditions. Economic is disparity. So many of them are poor and living under the poverty level. But hey, that was yesterday's war. We don't worry about that anymore. We'll just blame somebody for whatever and move on. And that's what I fear is coming for the people of Ukraine. I don't know where more than triple what has already been spent through the entire war. Where's that going to come from? I don't see it. I mean, especially if you have some economically distressed people and the pressure of a war, even with the claims that it could go to the West are gone. Yeah, the chances of that money coming, pretty low. And so I think that the people of Ukraine are going to be paying for this for a long time, and that's the ones that survive. Next, let's move on to John Mearsheimer, another one of our favorites. Always got some incredible insights to show. And he's going to specifically be talking about some of the new ordinance that that Russia has been using. So the talk has been about this aid package, especially going in, providing more ammunition, especially in interceptor missiles and in artillery shells. Those are two of the biggest things that have been hailed by the supporters of this package so far. But as John Mearsheimer points out, there's another side of this equation.
There's one other element in this story, and that is that the Russians have taken these dumb bombs, these mini dumb bombs that they have. They've put kits on them that turn guidance kits, that turn them from dumb bombs to smart bombs, which allows the aircraft that launched those bombs to stand off at a distance and basically put the bombs in a pickle barrel. And this has had a devastating effect, not only on the frontline Ukrainian troops, but on infrastructure and troop concentrations right behind the front lines and even deeper into Ukraine.
Russia is now mass producing them. They've been using them for a while in smaller numbers, but now then they're starting to get them in larger numbers. And here's what these glide bombs are. This is an FAB 500, one of the more common ones that's used. The FAB 2500 is another one. Look, these have been the bombs themselves have been in existence and in their inventory since the 60s. I mean, they go that far back. They were just basically gravity bombs. You just dropped them and you hope that they would land on target. But now then with these kits that they put on them, as you said, they can drop them into a pickle barrel. This glide kit, as you see depicted on the top here, is literally, it's a glide, like a glide airplane. But it has a guidance system on the nose, which will bring it onto a pinpoint target at up to 45 miles away, which means that the Russian aircraft, like the ones you saw in the opening scene there, are able to launch these things from well outside of the range of any of the tactical air defense capacities that they have. So here they are in one of the factories where they're going to show some of these larger bombs. And you see how these things are massive. I think the ones on the left are the 1500s, if I'm not mistaken. I think they'll show that in a second. But these things are just gargantuan. You're going to see some of the results of what these things look like when they hit the ground here. And you'll see why the destruction that we showed you in the opening scenes are happening. Just look at that. That's from one bomb that goes in and can just devastate an area. Now Russia is launching, many scores of these things every single day, sometimes even in the hundreds in some areas. There's no defense against these. The Ukraine side can't shoot them down because they're just gravity bombs that literally glide onto target. And when Russia could continue to mass produce these things and bring them in unabated, and the Ukraine side can't shoot down a glide bomb, or they can't hit the aircraft that's launching it because they can't reach it out that far. That's not their biggest problem. Their biggest problem is the inability to shoot down these glide bombs. And so this continues a trend that we keep seeing over. We always want to say, here's what Ukraine's going to do. We're going to give this $60 billion package and it's going to do this. And in 2025, so the advocates say, then they're going to go back on the offensive. Although Zelensky, as we've shown in a little while, is actually claiming it's going to happen this fall. Not sure what army he's going to have to do that with. We'll discuss that at another time. But the issue that's at stake here is something that crops up all the time. While we want to project forward what the Ukraine side is going to do, we want to keep the Russian side as though it's static, as though whatever they're on now is where they're going to be a year from now when the Ukraine side is ready to do something. But that's not how it works, as this graphically depicts here. You have the Russian.
If we summarize the Russian progress on the west and the Russian progress on the east, we can make a conclusion.
Sorry about that. We had a little glitch. That's coming up later. What you have is that the Russian side is constantly evolving and constantly advancing, just like everybody's doing. Everyone in any war does. They constantly they iterate things and they make some adjustments and they experiment with some things. Things that work, they do more of it. Things that don't work, they jettison, whatever. So that's what the Russian side is doing. At the same time, the Ukraine side is doing this. We've seen this advancement in drone strikes. We've seen it then come up with anti-drone capacity. Then one side figures it out, and then they start going back this way. It's just constant iteration here. So when you see the U.S. talking about they're going to provide this stuff, and then when they get this capacity or this much ammunition, then all of a sudden they're going to be, folks, the other side is also advancing at the same time. So the relative balance between what the two sides have now, in all probability, is still going to be greater on the Russian side, even if the Ukraine side remains viable up until next year, which I think is less and less likely by the day, by the month. Then we have to make a plan for that. We have to contemplate that. But it's just this same concept over and over, a lack of vision, a lack of understanding of how things work and loving spin and loving those flag waving ceremonies and putting those sound bites out there. But here's the problem with that. That only lasts for the news cycle today, because the reality is creeping back forward and it's coming ready for a hammer blow. And at some point, it's not going to matter how much you spend anything, because the reality keeps imposing. Now, those bombs that I just showed you, with the FAB bombs and the growing capacity of the Russians and how much they've learned, let me show you what's happening on the battlefield this very day. Check this out from Military Summary Channel, which has the best intel out there that's available literally every single day. Here's a significant advance by the Russians in the area west of Avdiivka.
So if we summarize the Russian progress on the west and the Russian progress on the east, we can make a conclusion basically that the Russians are trying to, let's say, to encircle and to create a cauldron for the Ukrainian forces who are currently located in the area between Очеретино, Arkhangelsk, Novokalinovo and Keramik. There are lots of soldiers, a lot of Ukrainian forces in the area, and as you can see, according to directions of Russian attacks, we can make a conclusion that the Russians try to encircle them, or at least to force these Ukrainians to fall back. I'll remind you that this territory is under the responsibilities of the 23rd Mechanized Brigade, 115th Brigade, and small different, let's say, battalions and platoons of different forces on the direction.
Yeah, so do you see that on the Western media? Have you heard that anywhere? CNN, MSNBC, Fox, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. You heard any of that? Why don't they cover that stuff? That's today, this very day, hours ago, that was published. Those are the creeping forward that Russia's going for now. And they continue to be making these large advancements. And you see more sophisticated combat combined arms operations on the ground. So they're coming in from the flanks, they're surrounded, they're cutting this off, and they're able to move now. This is more advanced and larger advances than they've had at any point in the war. And the question is, how much more is this going to be translated into other areas of the battlefront? That remains to be seen. But they are definitely at the strategic, or at least at the operational level, gaining a mastery of understanding of how to bring air power, artillery, rockets, rotary winged aircraft. All these things are coming together on the battlefield and having significant efforts going forward. And you're just not hearing that on the main media, but that's the reality underneath all the flag waving. All right, moving on to the next one here. Now, then, let's take kind of a pullback of the higher level. And speaking of funding, and let's look at some of the things on the actual DoD budget and where some of our money's going. And you're going to see the same thing about the lack of a strategic vision, but you're going to see the same thing also about money. Here's it is. Check this out.
Let me ask you this. We don't have the facilities to ramp up, or we're not there yet. Well, what does the annual military bill of $800+ billion go for then? Is it just really the maintenance and upkeep of what we've got and our military personnel? I'm just at a loss to figure out how this works, Daniel.
I have worked when I was on active duty. I worked in the Future Combat Systems. What was at the time in the mid 2000s the premier Future Combat program that was going to launch us into the future and produce all these, high tech, new modern weapons, whatever. We spent billions and billions of dollars on this, and it totally flopped, and for very predictable reasons. But that's common. How many times have you heard this weapon system in the Army, the Air Force, the Navy? It just completely bombs. We put so much money in so many high-tech things like the F-35, the DDG-1000 destroyer. You pick it. There's stuff all over the place. We keep putting all this money in, and these really high price per unit items. But we don't put our money in the quote blocking and tackling the basic things like ammunition production or a weapons production for interceptor missiles, for air defense, for example. Only now are we getting into the drones. So the things that you need on a baseline, how to sustain combat, we don't put any money in there. We put it in all these other issues. And of course, a lot of that goes into the defense industrial complex on areas that are useful, but not decisive on battlefields as we're seeing play out right now.
Who is responsible for selecting these contractors to go after these sort of pie in the sky, if I may put it lightly, projects that sometimes quite often don't work out? Are they listening to politicians and the lobbyists and the military industrial complex manufacturers? Or are they talking to folks who are actually serving in the military and know what the needs are and the real-time issues now?
Well, here's the problem. I mean, this is exactly what President Eisenhower warned about, in his famous military-industrial complex. It's military-industrial congressional complex, because the people at the top of Congress, especially in these committees like the Armed Services committees in both chambers, the appropriations committees, they are highly funded by the defense contractors themselves. They are lobbied by the millions of dollars every year. They put into their campaign funds every single year. And the generals, the people who get to be generals who give this advice at those committee hearings, are guys who are in their pocket. I mean, we just have to be honest about it. Is you can't become a general in today's world, Army, unless you're political and you play the game. I saw it my whole career as I came up. I watched great guys who were not playing the game, who were doing what's right and just telling the truth, get sidelined because they don't want to hear that. They only want to hear what people desire for them to hear. And you see, this is the result. That was on the Brian Thomas radio show, so I know a lot of you didn't get to see that too. So we definitely wanted to slot that in here. But one of the things that I didn't get a chance to talk about on the air there is how our system, at least in the Army, actually works. It's similar in the Air Force and Navy, unfortunately. I worked in the Future Combat Systems, which was at the time the premier futuristic system where the U.S. was going to say, when we fight into the distant future, we're going to have these new tanks, these new armored personnel carriers, new rocket systems, and this networked system of systems. So they called it all this. I worked in there and I watched what happened on the ground. And you see this huge amount of money in the budget every year. And it's, whatever the number is today, it's 10 times, or it's larger than the next 10 nations combined in the world. Even the rich countries is how much we have. And so you keep having to wonder, why do we seem to always be allegedly short on money? Why do we have so few missiles that we have, and the capacity is so low? Why do we have these problems and these limitations if we have this massive defense budget, which is supposed to carry all that stuff? One of the reasons is because we finance the wrong things. So this Future Combat Systems, we ended up spending more than a decade and $20 billion plus, and we got nothing for it. And it was so painful for me to watch from the inside, because I was an operations officer in the program itself. And I got there because I'd already had combat experience in tank warfare. So I was very keenly aware of how wars are actually fought at the tactical level. And so I'm seeing all of these theoretical things that are being put forward by people who should have known better, who many of whom also had combat experience, but somehow they were just focused on fiction. But when they tell Congress that, hey, this plan is working here, it's going to be this fantastic thing, and they show all these PowerPoint slides, created literal, I'm not making this up, video presentations that are like movie scenes that project what's going to happen with actors and the whole thing, and they say this is reality. You better believe that those congressmen are going to be shelling out money left and right for this kind of thing. So that goes into the budget. And of course, that goes into Boeing and General Dynamics and several other defense contractors that were only too happy to have this money. I was able to see, as were many other mid-ranking officers, I'll point out. I was a major at the time. We knew it wasn't going to work. We told them why. When they did experiments in the field, it didn't work when they did genuine experiments. Then they did for show experiments where everything was scripted, not actual experiments. And then magically, it allegedly worked. But we knew it never would. And I continued to write that. And I told that in publicly that it wasn't going to. Took a lot of heat for that. But then a year later, after I published that article in the Armed Forces Journal, the program was canceled by the Secretary of Defense, citing many of the things that I had written about before. But see, here's the problem. Here's the real problem. That's bad enough as it is. No one was ever held to account. Not only were they not held to account, the one-star general that was in charge of that program got promoted. He was given a major award, a major military award, and then eventually rose to 3-star levels. These people, many of them who were in the program later on went to work at General Dynamics, at Boeing. They got jobs out of this. And of course, then they go on to other programs and to help advise how to do other vehicle programs that came out of the dust and the ashes of the FCS program, which were also canceled after spending billions of dollars there too. You see the common theme here. We're not being honest with anything except the military industrial complex, folks. That deal is alive and well and was a great success then, and it's a great success now. Problem is that comes at the expense of our actual capacity, because now then we don't have enough money to put in the ammunition situation. We don't have enough money to build rockets very fast or interceptor missiles, things that are desperately needed if we actually have to fight a war, a sustained war. We need all that stuff, but it's not there because we've funded and invested in things that we don't even have. All these new vehicles that we tried to fund never hit the ground. They didn't even have a production model, much less any actual, coming off the lines, the assembly lines. Never happened. That's one of the problems there. Moving on.
Air Force owns and operates DoD's largest fleet of commercial derivative aircraft. They use commercial parts. This, Mr. Secretary, is a bag of bushings. This bag of bushings, stamped out by machinists,
what's happening here.
Need a, need
what's
a high
happening
school
right
diploma.
now. This is
it's not anything high tech about
later.
this.
This is earlier this
All
month.
of this bag is compliant with the FAA specifications. How much do you think the Air Force pays for this bag of bushings?
I don't know, Congressman.
$90,000. This is a $90,000 bag of bushings that you need for any jet turbine engine just to operate. So the exorbitant cost due to DoD only buying commercial parts from the OEMs, which is essentially sole source, is literally driving us out of business. So my question is, why can't, these are commercial birds out there. Why can't we use FAA compliant? It's the safety standard leader in the world. Why can't we do that?
I don't know a reason why we couldn't. I don't know a reason why we couldn't. I don't know a reason why we couldn't.
Yeah. And see, here's the embarrassing thing. That's on top of what I just described to you that I had seen earlier in my career on something that was multi-billion dollars. And this is a $90,000 bag of bushings, which could probably be bought commercially over the shelf for, I don't know, $10,000, $5,000. Who knows what the number is? He didn't say, but it's obviously exorbitant. But that's relatively small. You saw how embarrassed the person from the DoD was that he was investigating, talking about. And then he got up and went to lunch probably and move on to the next one. No one says anything different. Nobody's held to account. Nothing's changing. So I bet that $90,000 bag of bushings is going to be bought next month as well, because nothing's going to change. And until we change that, we're going to continue to deepen our crisis here. All right, now let's move across to another area here. Let's go to the Middle East, and we're going to look at Matthew Ho, who's going to tell us some of the problems that we have about what's going on in Israel and how this is undercutting American national security interests.
Talking with somebody else a few days ago about World War II, when the Red Army went into Germany, and I believe the Soviets called it revenge for everything. The actions of the Red Army in Germany at the end of World War II was exactly that, revenge for everything. The Palestinians, that could apply to them. That may apply to them in the sense of, how could this have occurred to you on top of the decades and decades of war against you, essentially, the ethnic cleansing and then the occupation and the humiliation that have occurred continually for generations, and then now this to occur? And how could you not want revenge for everything? And particularly when you look at the scope of the genocide in Gaza, it covers everything. Everything is systematically and deliberately being destroyed. They're destroying any greenhouse they come across. The Israelis destroy it. You name any part of the infrastructure that is in any way integral to a functioning society, and the Israelis are deliberately destroying it, let alone, of course, targeting and killing civilians, in particular, as we found out with our understanding of how the Israeli AI systems work, choosing to kill resistance or militant or Hamas fighters and leaders, not when they are away from their families, but when they're with their families, making that deliberate choice, utilizing their AI systems to kill armed resistance members when they are with their families as well as their neighbors, as opposed to being able to, they could target and kill them when they're away, but they're choosing to target and kill them when they go home.
And, the revenge is, and those kinds of high emotions, especially coming after October 7th last year, is the worst thing upon which you can base a strategy. Look, the people of Israel were outraged because of what happened, and understandably so. Every people on the planet would be outraged if something like that happened. And when you combine that with the fact that Israel has an enormous amount of military power, and the people in Gaza Strip, where Hamas was hiding, have none or very little anyway, then you see that the temptation to exploit that and just say, we're going to have revenge for all of this stuff that happened, and just in a blind rage, just kind of go in and start literally mowing the place down and just razing entire sections of the city and of the Strip, and multiple cities in the Gaza Strip there. Problem is, well, there's many problems with it, obviously, but that's not a strategy, because there's no end state. There's no end game here that's good for Israel. And in fact, you see this same kind of pattern we've seen throughout all the stuff we talked about this week. What's the objective? What are you trying to accomplish at the end of the day? Now, Netanyahu claims on the surface that it's to bring peace to Israel, but there's no plan for that. There's no path that he's going on. There's none of this, the tactics and the strategies that he's employing will accomplish that end. To the contrary, he is building up so much more anger against his people than ever that's going to solve. Because anytime you kill tens of thousands of innocent men, women, and children, old people, patients in hospitals who were found in mass graves this past week and uncovered, and some people are trying to find out what's going on with that. Israel is obviously thwarting any investigation into it. But see, it doesn't matter about an investigation, folks, because all the people in the Strip know about this. They hear about this, and their anger is off the charts. You talk about revenge, they want revenge. That's why I keep saying Israel is building itself future insecurity, because while they want revenge for what happened on October 7th, they're now building an entire population that wants revenge because of what's happened since October 7th. That's the key part that Israel is not taking into consideration. So when you talk about wanting to bring peace to your people, the only way that Israel can do it right now is to eliminate all of the Palestinians in Gaza, and probably the West Bank as well, because if they remain, it's going to be a constant source of anger and desire for retribution and probably violence. I mean, it really couldn't be any other way. So unless Netanyahu's actual plan is to either kill everyone or succeed finally in driving them completely out of the land, and I don't know how that could possibly be accomplished in either one of those, whether killing everyone or driving them out, because already the Western populations, and certainly those in the Middle East and elsewhere in Asia and the global South, are already really, really angry at Israel for what's happened so far. Now, once they start going into Rafah, which apparently they're going to do potentially any day now, and then if it gets to this next phase, I don't know that that Western populations will stomach that far. I think there actually is a line, and all of this leads to the lack of security and putting the future risk of Israel at stake by going down doing this, because who's going to sit by and watch a literal physical wiping out of a population in the modern era here? I don't think even the American supporters of Israel right now can go that far. I hope. I hope and pray. But I know that there are many populations that definitely won't support that. And there is going to come an end to this at some point. We just don't know where it is. And the faster the U.S. can actually get to a place where we can help forestall some of that stuff and don't be complicit in it by providing them unlimited weapons and ammunition with no strings attached, because then obviously that comes back on our own potential security. But we'll keep following that one for you. Now I want to move to Asia here in the last little bit of time we have with you today. And that is that earlier today, Secretary of State Blinken, who has been in China having some negotiations, is going to come out. And I'll show you just a minute what he said here. But first of all, we want to show you that that there was some news out that Vladimir Putin is actually going to go to China next month. Check this out.
The Russian President Vladimir Putin plans to visit China in the month of May, and this could be Putin's first planned trip abroad since his re-election, as Moscow is seeking for deeper ties with Beijing. While attending a business forum in Moscow, the Russian president revealed his plan to visit China, although he did not provide any further details about it. Nor did he say as to when exactly this is to take place. The last time Vladimir Putin had visited China was back in October. Now, Putin's announcement came shortly after the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken landed in Beijing as Washington is seeking to diffuse its tensions with China.
Now, I'll show you some of what Secretary Blinken said just hours ago. Actually, just right before we came on air, I'll show you some of what he said coming out of that. And then I'm going to show you some of what China is saying about that. So you kind of see what everybody's position is going on here. But look, let's take a look at it's kind of the bigger picture here. You may recall, I want to say as few as 2 weeks before the war broke out in February 2022 between Russia and Ukraine, is that Putin and Xi Jinping signed a letter of a no bounds friendship, unlimited friendship, something to that effect. And of course, that has continued on even into this day where, China and Russia keep moving closer and closer together. We keep pushing China in many areas. Especially on this sensitive Taiwan issue, on the economic front, there's many things that we keep doing. We keep making demands. We keep sanctioning people. Obviously, we keep sanctioning Russia as well. And now we're sanctioning Tehran again, based on some things that happened, here recently with that attack they had on Israel. And of course, there's long-lasting sanctions on North Korea. You see, all of these things keep pushing those folks closer and closer together in cooperation more and more with each other and in antagonism more and more to the United States. That's one of the costs of our lack of strategic vision. Even at the operational level, it expands into the strategic level as well. Instead of recognizing what's going on around the world, our feeding forces bent on our, if not destruction, certainly working against our interest. We pay no attention to that at all, because this is a lot bigger than whether you're going to physically get into a war with China. I pray to God we never do. But even if we avoid combat, we're building in a system that's giving them every incentive in the world to work against us, not with us or for us. And those things are entirely possible. There is every reason in the world with sage diplomacy and wisdom and just the slightest willingness to have some, tamper back our arrogance and just a little bit of humility, just a little bit, that would go so far into helping our interests worldwide. It would make ourselves safer. It would lower the risk of people working against us, and it would increase the chances of finding win-win solutions with Russia, with Ukraine, with China, with North Korea. I don't know about Iran. Maybe that's a bridge too far. But you can at least lower the antagonisms down. We don't have to actively give them a reason to want to provide weapons and ammunition to Russia, which is currently the case. That's how short-sighted our stuff is now. So we're failing at the tactical level, at the operational level, and at the strategic level because we don't have a vision, we don't have a strategy, and we aren't willing to compromise on anything. We want to try to push everything. But here's what Secretary of State Blinken said a couple hours ago. Here's at least what they're pursuing. Check this out.
In my discussions today, I reiterated our serious concern about the PRC providing components that are powering Russia's brutal war of aggression against Ukraine. China is the top supplier of machine tools, microelectronics, nitrocellulose, which is critical to making munitions and rocket propellants, and other dual-use items that Moscow is using to ramp up its defense industrial base. A defense industrial base that is churning out rockets, drones, tanks, and other weapons that President Putin is using to invade a sovereign country, to demolish its power grid and other civilian infrastructure, to kill innocent children, women, and men. Russia would struggle to sustain its assault on Ukraine without China's support. In my meetings with NATO allies earlier this month, and with our G7 partners just last week, I heard that same message. Fueling Russia's defense industrial base not only threatens Ukrainian security, it threatens European security. Beijing cannot achieve better relations with Europe while supporting the greatest threat to European security since the end of the Cold War. As we told China for some time, ensuring transatlantic security is a core U.S. interest. In our discussions today, I made clear that if China does not address this problem, we will.
So you can't just have a debate, a discussion. You have to throw in a threat. You either do this or we will. So here he comes on a diplomatic mission and standing, I think, still in Beijing. He wants to tell them, you're either going to do what we say or we're going to take action for it. against you. So you either do the right thing or we're going to help you, or we're going to do it for you, whether you want it to or not. What do you think that China's going to do? Do you think that China's going to go, oh, dang it. Okay. All right. I guess we better do what Uncle Sam says. No, that may have been the case in the past. It was the case in the past. You know, that's why I keep saying over and over. You may remember sometimes I say we're acting like it's still 1990, which China was still relatively backwards. They were a peasant army. They were not modern. Russia was, had just collapsed from the Soviet Union, and they were on their heels in every regard. And we could literally do whatever we want, just issue orders, and they had no power or choice to do anything but accept it. That's not the case anymore. China is no longer that weak power. They are now an economic power and a military power, regional military power. So we can't just go in and give these instructions and orders because they're just not going to listen. And in fact, here's how the China media is talking about this issue here and his meeting. They're focused on this. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with visiting Secretary of State Anthony Blinken on Friday. Wang pointed out that although positive interactions in the bilateral relations have been increasing, negative factors in China-U.S. relations continue to build up as China's core interests are challenged, warning that the U.S. should not cross China's red lines on issues related to the sovereignty, security, development interests. And of course, the primary one there is the Taiwan issue there. So they're issued their own warnings that don't cross our red lines. But what they're not saying is either do what we tell you or we're going to take action. So it's just kind of embarrassing to be able to say that, at least on the diplomatic level, China is doing it better than we are, because there's a reasonable chance that theirs will succeed, that they say, look, just don't cross this red line because we mean it. We've said nothing different since 1949, and they haven't. And if Taiwan ever does declare independence, and especially if we endorse it, then I have no doubts that they would make good on that threat and there would be war. Then the question is, would we join in with it and basically commit regional suicide? Because that's what would happen to our military if we went on a no-notice war with China. God forbid that should ever happen. I will continue to argue against it as long as I have breath, or until we actually make that fateful decision. But all we have to do to avoid that negative outcome with China is just don't go down that path and cross over that red line here. All the other things are on the table. China has continued to be willing to have negotiations and discussions about economic issues, about trade issues, about intellectual property rights issues, even some territorial issues. There's been lots of complaints and threats and claims made by many nations over some of these islands in the area. And so far, they have not taken any action against them, nor has anyone else. So it hasn't expanded beyond that. So there's still room for diplomacy. It's tough. It's hard. It's always challenging. Every nation, and China is no exception, tries to exploit every chance they can to improve their position, whether that's economically, military, or diplomatically, however they want to do it. That's understandable. We do the same thing. We should do the same thing. There's no question that we should use our diplomatic heft and might to try to improve the situation of the United States. That's what every nation's diplomacy is for. But it matters how you do it. If you go in with a diplomatic mentality and mindset and understand that there are rules for these kinds of things that have been in existence for thousands of years, and how you engage with foreign powers to try to get there's one thing you say publicly, and then you do other things behind the scenes. But when you say publicly these demands like it's 1990, and you issue this broad warning to China that they either do what they're told or there's going to be consequences, it's just not going to work against a rising power. They're tired of dealing with that. And so they're not going to do that. We're going to be frustrated. We're not going to have success where we could have success. With proper diplomacy and proper engagements and a willingness to give here and a take over here and have a win-win situation, if we do more of that, then we have a much better chance of actually getting China to do some things that we want them to. But instead, we just want to get everything and give nothing. And that's a recipe for disaster. It's just another one of the examples of our short-sightedness here, and something that needs to change. Well, that's our show for today, folks. That's our briefing. But don't forget to tune back in today at 2 p.m. We have a terrific show. We have David Sachs is going to be talking about Ukraine. Is he a tragic disaster, as some have accused him of lately? Or is he actually a wise sage? You tune in at 2:00 to be the judge. And in case you don't know, by the way, some of you may not know, David Sachs, who's been on our show a number of times already, it was the co-founder of PayPal, among many other things here. And he helped Elon Musk with issues related to his some of his holdings, especially at former Twitter, now X, etc. This is a guy who is a mover and shaker in the United States. You're not going to want to miss this. Tune in 2:00 today. Be sure to like and subscribe. Share this with your friends, and we will see you on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.